Daily Rambam for Thursday, Yud Aleph Cheshvan Tavshin Pei Aleph, the fourth Perek of Hilchos Shabbos. So yesterday we learned all the halachas of Bishul and Shabbos and the Gzera. We're trying to avoid shoveling coals. Now we're moving on to the dinim of Atmana, insulation on Shabbos, insulating something to keep it warm. And for a change, surprise, it's actually an extremely short Perek, as we shall see. When we get to the end, I have a few additional halachas that I have from Shulchan Aruch. I collect them all at the end of the Perek. So we'll do that when we get to the end. Halacha Aleph. Yesh Dvarim. There are things that if you were to insulate the tavshel in them, it warms it up. And it increases it continues the cooking in line with fire, similar to fire. Goin, gefes v'zevel umelach v'sid v'choil. So gefes is just a concept that exists in halacha. It's pieces from olive. After you press the olives, you have some leftover pieces. That's the gefes. Zevel is manure. Melach is salt. Sid is lime. Choil is sand. So things like that. Create some heat. And zugin is unprocessed wool, pieces of wool. Zugin are grape skins, moichen are the pieces of wool, and asavim is grass. And when they're still moist on their own, from their original source, they still have moisture. So then they also are said to increase the warmth.
All these things are sources of fuel.
Yeah.
They didn't throw away nothing.
Right. So even though you're not lighting them on fire, but there's warmth there. And the term to use to refer to these things are davar hamaisif, something that adds warmth, hevel. And there are other things, where if you were to put the tafshel and then it'll just maintain the warmth. It doesn't add it doesn't continue the cooking, but just prevents it from cooling off. Gain, zugin, umaychen, vasavim, those three things we listed earlier, yeveshim, after they dried, they're not moist anymore. Uksus, uperis, v'kanfiyeno, no'eris hapishton, no'eris charashim, mushlachem, v'gizei tzamer. So ksus is clothing, peris is produce, kanfiyeno are pigeon feathers, no'eris hapishton is when you comb the flax, so the pieces that come out, that's the no'eris. The seres charashim is when the carpenters chop wood. The sawdust. Shlachen is skins of animals, and gizit samer is pieces of wool. Different than meichen. So these are all dvarim elu nikra and davar she'enei ma'aseh. These are things that do not add hevel. So the Maggid Mishnah says the Rambam only spoke about the kind of thing you're doing the hatmana in. He didn't talk about the tavshel. So he says Pirush that these dinei hatmana are b'chol tavshel be'ezet tzad she'yeh. And that's what everyone agrees to, that the type of tavshel isn't the factor here.
So they're more like insulators.
Yeah.
So you put a hot pot inside of
more than insulators.
More.
They actually are moistif.
Increase.
They increase.
Right. Now, we spoke about gefes and what exactly gefes is. So actually, the Kesef Mishnah notes that the Gemara discusses this gefes from Zaysim and this gefes from Shumshimin. Sesame, something like that. So the Gemara seems to think that Zaysim is definitely more, creates more warmth than Shumshimin, but it wasn't sure when we said Gefes in the Mishnah, is it including both or not? And the Gemara tried bringing a raya that it's Dafka Zaysim, and the Gemara said, I can tell you that Shumshimin is also awesome. So Kesef Mishnah says, you look at the Gemara, it seems like they never answered the question though. Try bringing a raya, pushed away the raya, it doesn't have a resolution, the question wasn't resolved. And since this whole thing is a derabanan, so l'chayra we should go l'kula. So therefore, only zaysim should be a problem, and shumshim should not be a problem. So the Rambam, who just said gefes, and he didn't make a distinction between different types of gefes, sounds like he's going l'chomera. So what's the story with the Rambam? It could be that based on the fact the last sentence of the Gemara tried to bring a raya that not shumshim. The Gemara said inami. Because even though it's a derabanan, but it's karev lavai lidei isra Torah, you're just this far removed from transgressing an actual isra deraisa. So that's the kind of suffix that we are machmer in, and there might be other examples of that. Now that asks l'chayra a very simple, straightforward question on this whole halacha. Says Mina din haya shetamin medavar ha'ma'asav b'yayim v'yishar atavshel tamar b'Shabbos sharim ishayna gabe eish b'Shabbos. What are you telling me? You're telling me that the thing increases warmth. We put things on the fire. We leave things on the fire for Shabbos. Of course, and the whole idea is that it's not fully cooked before Shabbos, and its cooking is occurring on Shabbos. And as long as you're Mesiach Das and Gruf Ktuma, all the different things, you're fine. So you should be able to do the same thing for Hatmana and put it in something that will increase the warmth. No different than leaving it on the fire. So why is Hatmana different? Chachamim prohibited to do this even Erev Shabbos because we're concerned that maybe the pot will start boiling on Shabbos. And then you're going to uncover it until the bubbling calms down. And then you're going to cover it again on Shabbos. And then in essence, you're doing Hatmana all over again on Shabbos, Shu'aser, and that's already also. You don't have that problem with Bishul. You're not good by uncover. Even if you uncovered it, you wouldn't be restarting the bishul. Here, hatmana by definition is by everything being covered and closed. So if you uncover it and then cover it again, then you're doing an isser. So that's why you can't do hatmana and a davar ha'ma'asav hevel at all. The Rambam says something very interesting. He says you would be able to do this right before Shabbos ben hashmashos. Stam k'deiras ben hashmashos. Because if the whole problem is that it's going to boil over on Shabbos and you need to calm it down, it says by Hashmashos, most pots have already reached boiling point and they've already receded from boiling. So and once that happened once and it receded, it's not going to boil over again. So there's no concern about boiling over on Shabbos. In which case, now you could actually put it, but davar ha'ma'asav hevel ben hashmashos. It's very surprising halach. It's based on a Gemara. We'll see that it's discussed. Let's just do halacha gimel because it's following in the same line. And why can't you cover the tavshel on something that doesn't increase it on Shabbos itself? You're not cooking. It's not why it's not like cooking. The reason why Chacham said it's also we're afraid that if you're gonna put it in that on Shabbos, you might end up putting it in remetz. Remetz is a mixture of ash and coals, and there's some sparks in there. And you're going to end up touching the coals, moving the coals around, and that's like cooking.
If you leave let's say a pot on top of the blech, and it's a loose-fitting top, so you put a towel on top of it. So that's an example.
Oh, so he's saying you're not allowed to do hatmana.
I'm saying that would be an example of a modern day.
Right. It happens to be that the combination of on a stove with that's something Shulchan Aruch talks about. We might touch on it later when we go through some additional halachas. But as we see, it's pretty short Perek, so there are additional details that are from other places.
I'm trying to bring it into a modern situation.
Right.
We don't have these implements.
Right. I was going to mention, yeah. So and therefore it's usher to.
Is that halacha? You're not allowed to do hatmana at all.
Yeah. Well, we'll talk about it in a minute.
Sometimes I want to keep the blech outside. I cook up the soup. I cover it with a few towels and it stays hot.
That's something you have to be very careful with. That's like,
you know, do it.
You have to watch out for that. Yeah. Although there might be a way to do it, so you have to pay attention. So now, even though most Rambams there isn't a hasaga serayvit, but in the Frankel edition of the Rambam they have hasaga of the Rayvit. They say that it's not on the other ones. And the Rayvit says regarding in the end of halacha beis that bein hashmashos you are allowed to be taimim with davar ha'ma'asav hevel. The Rayvit says me'olam ma'nir v'lenishmu tapuches ka'elo. Unheard of. What is this? Be'boid yoim aser bein hashmashos mutter. He says, I understand where the Rambam is coming from, but you have to know the Gemara. Based on the gersa in the Gemara, it seems to say something about bein hashmashos. But even if you go with his gersa, hapirish shalom mekulkul b'yaser, he has a terrible pirish in how he understands his own gersa, and I'll explain his gersa differently. And anyway, I have a different gersa that's better. And Maggid Mishnah also comments on that thing. So there's some background. The Goinim, the Rif, for the Shiva of Kol Achreinim Zal, all the Achreinim already responded and said, "Shein Davar Miskabel, Oijoim is also ben Hashmashos is mutter," and therefore the Rayvit he paraphrases the Rayvit. So that's relating to that halacha. But anyway, so the maskana of halachas beis and halacha gimel is that hatmana is more severe than bishul. for the reasons that Rambam said. So if it's not Moisif, it's still also on Shabbos, and if it's a Moisif, it's also even on Erev Shabbos. Halacha Daled. Other situations which it's mutter to do a form of atmana. Halacha Daled says Safik Hashecha, Safik Lei Hashecha. You're not sure. It's basically being Hashmashus. You're not sure if it's Shabbos or not. Mutter Litmain is Davar Cham. So if you're doing it with the Eifin Hamutter, that it's not Meisav Havel, you're still allowed to do it then, even if you're not sure if it's dark enough. Mutter Litman Davar Atzainim b'Shabbos v'Davar Sheini Meisav Kadesh Leitstanim b'Yeser or Kadesh Tafik Tinasai. And even though we said you're not allowed to be put something warm, even in a Davar Sheini Meisav, but if it's cold, then you are allowed to put it. If you just don't want it to get colder or you want it to defrost a little bit, then it would be okay. Also, Chamish Tmana Me'ad Shabbos v'Nezgala b'Shabbos Mutter L'Chaseisan Sharei Einoi Moisif. If you did a Tmana Erev Shabbos and it got uncovered on its own, then
but he says you're not allowed it either way, no? Didn't he say before you
said earlier,
you said Davar Sheini Moisif, you're not allowed to.
Right.
Davar Moisif, he said only Ben Hashmashos, right?
Yeah.
So maybe we're talking about Ben Hashmashos.
No, this is Chamish Tmana Erev Shabbos v'Nezgala b'Shabbos. Mutter L'Chaseisan Sharei Einoi Moisif. And he's going to say another similar Mutter L'Hachnaf Ksui b'Shabbos. You can exchange the covering. Keitzad. Leitel Ksus Maniach Kan Feyoino and Leitel Kan Feyoino Maniach Ksus. You can take one covering, put another covering. So in that kind of situation, it's okay. So similarly, if it slipped off, you're allowed to put it back. I guess earlier in Halacha Beis, you opened the whole pot and then you covered it, and then so that would be Hatmana anew. And here it's just like interchanging the Hatmana. So it seems to be okay. The Maggid Mishnah says that actually, if you look in the source in the Gemara, it says in Bala Haisef Maisef. In the source in the Gemara, it seems to be talking about adding additional things, not just put something that fell off or to exchange it for something else. It says in Bala Haisef Maisef, and then it says Ketzer Oisa. And Shimon Gamliel says you take this din in, you put the glufkarim. It says apparently from the Rambam, it seems that the Rambam held that Shimon Gamliel wasn't explaining in Bala Haisef Maisef. He was arguing on Bala Haisef Maisef that you can't actually add, you can only exchange. But if you actually just keep on piling new things on top, that would be awesome. But he says others were matir, and they explained the Gemara differently. And the Rambam quotes the Ramban and the Rashba. That was the frame of reference at the time of the Maggid Mishnah. There wasn't there's Ramban and Rashba. So Kasam Mishnah, however, disagrees with the Maggid Mishnah. Here we actually have a machlekes in the first year Rambam. So the Maggid Mishnah says that Rambam asers to add additional, if it's covered, to just pile more things on top. And the Kasam Mishnah says no. It says Velinera, even though the Maggid Mishnah says, he quotes the Maggid Mishnah, I know what the Maggid Mishnah says. Velinera, that no, there's no indication from the Rambam. It says, in fact, it makes more sense that putting additional things on top is less of a chiddush. To say that you can exchange the covering for a different covering that's even warmer, right? Between Ksus and Kamfiyayna, one is warmer than the other. So you're actually taking off one covering and you're putting on a warmer covering. That seems like a bigger chiddush. And if the Rambam is saying that that's okay, that's the biggest chiddush, and for sure you could be Moisef Kisi al Kisui. So here you have a machlekes between the two Mefarshim on what the Rambam holds about being Moisef. Now the Rambam talks about Hatmana and a Kli Sheni. So the Rambam says, Pina ha'hei, Pina ha'tavshel, ha'yamayim ha'cham, ha'kli l'kli acher. Let's say you're not just changing you're not just changing the covering. You're pouring the actual tavshel into a different keli. If you already poured it into a different keli, mutar l'hatman ha'kli acher b'Shabbos, b'davar she'eni moisef, k'may ha'davar ha'tzayna. Then you can treat it like something cold. You said something cold, you're allowed to put in a davar she'eni moisef on Shabbos. So if you pour it from a kli rishon to kli sheni, you're allowed to as well. Shtei also l'hatman Shabbos el davar cham shu bi kli rishon she'nizbal shel. Hatman is only also for something that's in the kli rishon that it got cooked in. Avon pino, but if you put it into something else, then already it's mutter. Now for the final halacha vav. Additional things that we don't treat as bishul or atmana manichan mecham agabe mecham b'Shabbos ukdeid agabe kdeira ukdeid agabe mecham umecham agabe kdeira. So you're allowed to put a mecham. Maggid Mishnah says mecham is essentially mecham is for water and kdeira is for cooking, but mecham is probably a chaynik, it's metal, and a kdeira back then would have been earthenware. So you can put one on top of the other. He gives all four combinations. b'toch PM b'batzek, and you can even seal the top of dough. Not for them to be additionally heated. Just to maintain the warmth. I thought we can't do things to maintain the warmth on Shabbos. Only hatmana in the form of hatmana. But to put something, a warm keli on top of warm keli, that's okay. But you can't put something, a keli with something cold on top of a hot keli on Shabbos because it's creating new warmth. But if you left it from the night before, then it's mutter. And it's not considered. So yeah, that's the end of the Rambam. Yeah.
And they say it's ein bishul acha bishul. Then the other Rebbe says no, even if it's nachluchi or something. No. But they follow. So what do? They it could be a cold tafshel, right? And since it's already been fully cooked, they can put it on the blech on Shabbos morning.
If they look into those, I assume those halachas. We get to life.
No, they do it because they follow the Bes Yosef.
On top of the chalk.
I don't think you'd say you can put it on the blech on Shabbos. I'm not sure.
According to this, if it would actually warm it up, then no.
You can't do it.
Also, Batmana, I didn't get it. We mentioned.
Even if ain't bishul acha bishul, you're not allowed to warm it up.
If it's something that increases the warmth.
Forget about the bishul part.
They do
It
that.
says specific things, not clothing, not things like not towels.
Not towels?
No, certain forms of fuel.
But you do know
That's not forget about the bishul part.
That's
You're not allowed to be
boiling,
machal.
still boiling. When you wrap it up, the towels and the blanket.
I'm just saying, I'm not sure that it's
it doesn't get hotter, but it does.
Where did you see it done?
Their price can say
continues to
put
cook.
on the blech or they put it on the side.
According
they
to
put it on top of
this,
something else?
we said the ksos, clothing is. I don't know. Do we examine each new item that comes along nowadays and test it to see if it's mice of hevel or not? I mean, as far as
This is not a new item.
Maybe they put something down, then they put it on.
you didn't mention that along
Directly
the.
in the blech, I'm not
It's
sure.
got to do with heat, not with taste.
Mhm.
The taste it continues. Generally, people hold today when you pull something out of the oven, a steak, and you let it rest, it continues to
For
cook.
10 minutes.
Continues to cook.
So then it's doing that on its own. It's not the external thing that's doing it to it.
Yeah.
So that would be fine. So with regards to this last halacha that we learned, so the Magen Mishnah quotes as a Gemara. There's a story that Hahu Gavra put a kuza de maya on the puma de kumkuma. He put some water on top of the kumkum, and Rabbi screamed at him. And Rabbi said, "Why is it different than a mecham agabi mecham?" And he said, "There, it's just preserving. Here, it's creating new heat." Rashi says the kumkum was so hot that it was able to heat up the cold water. If it was only just going to defrost it, then it would be mutter. Because even if you have a big medura, you're allowed to put something near it to defrost. As long as it's defrosting, and as long as you wouldn't consider it.
It defrosts in the beginning, but then if you leave it there another hour, you suddenly got toast, not defrost.
So then that sounds problematic. And when the Rambam said that if you put the davar tzoinin on the kli cham ba'erev, he says that pashut. She'im hayezek ketayim b'davar ha'maisif v'ade b'shabbos hayaser. It's not b'davar ha'maisif. Okay, so now the Rambam. So now there are no additional halachas in Shulchan Aruch. So the Rambam. The Mashal didn't write what happens if you went ahead and did it, right? Yesterday's Perek, we had what if you did bishul, what if you left it on the fire, weren't supposed to. What about here? What if you left it in a davar ha'maisiv havel? So in Shulchan Aruch, in Simulation and Zayin Sef Aleph, it says that the tafshel is osir, even b'diavad. But dafka, if you know that you taka warmed something up as a result, or in its stomach v'yafaloi, but if it in the end, it just kept it as warm as it was all along, then it's mutter. And the Rambam says, that if you forgot and you left it b'shoigig, even if it's ma'asav hevel, that you are allowed to eat it. So there's more of a kula here with hatmana, according to the guy smart chai, the Rambam. And then that it's only, the whole thing is also only when you are doing hatmana for that night. But if you're doing hatmana for the next day, mutter lahatmin b'yayim adavar shemaisav hevel. You're allowed to do hatmana. The diavad, you can rely on it, but don't don't make it a habit. Shulchan Aruch also at Siv Beis, we learned that you're not allowed to, even if it's a special called tzarka, you're not allowed to put it on Shabbos in a davar she'eini meisav hevel. So the Shulchan Aruch says, however, if you have a different reason, if you're putting kalim on the tavshel to protect it from mice, or that it shouldn't get dirty, there's a dirty house, then it's mutter because you're not doing hatmana for warmth. It's just like a protection for the kedera. So that is mutter. When it comes to the list of things that are meisav hevel, so the Rama adds in Siv Gimel Haga Yesh Aimrim that you can actually hide it in the rocks, even though we consider rocks to be meisav hevel, because the milsa delay shchicha legazer beit rabbanan. Chacham didn't make exeter for something so unusual. Different halachas. I'm not going to say each one at this point. In Sif Ches, so that's where the Mechaber talks about a combination of hatmana and an oven, and there's certain ways where it's also. The Rama says Haga, the hatmana that we do in these medinas, where before Shabbos you put the hot pots in the oven, and then you seal the oven with tit. That's shari lekuli alma. And then this essentially is referring to what we know today as cholent. That was the minig in the shtetl that of Shabbos, everyone took their pots to the baker. The baker had a big oven, and they left the pots in the oven. So it was a form. So that was a form. So that was a form of hatmana. And here's where the Rama adds: mitzvah hatmana Shabbos b'Shabbos. It's a mitzvah to do hatmana. So interestingly, it doesn't say that the Mechaber got to be bishul, and I guess that was less common, but the way they had warm things on Shabbos was to Atmana. He said that's a mitzvah to do, because it's covered in Shabbos, like we mentioned yesterday. If someone seems skeptical, that we're concerned that he's apikaitis, a karoi, the Alter Rebbe adds on this last halacha, that the chamin or mazik, if you just don't, if you have a practical reason why you don't want to eat, then you're allowed to eat cold. But if it's coming out of mishay and amount, you prefer not to get into the whole situation with chamin on Shabbos, then that's problematic. Now in Sifrei Halacha today, they write that even though today no one really does hatmana in the normal, like the way Rambam is talking about. However, sometimes when the fire goes out, people might people might want to cover it with clothing. Even if it's towels and stuff like that, even if it's not meisav hevel, blankets, that is asur on Shabbos, unless you don't cover it fully, you don't cover it properly. So the Moshe Alter Rebbe says, the guy putting it in the oven, that if the kedera is megula lemaila, if it's not covered on top, it's not hatmana, even if it's in the oven and the top of the oven is covered, because hatmana b'davar meisav hevel, has to be davar meisav hevel. It has to be that you're concerned that you're going to hide it in the sand, in the coals. So it has to be from all sides. But it says even if it's a small oven, if there's some space on top, then it's okay. So, or you can put it into klisheni. If you pour the soup into klisheni, then we said you are allowed to put things that aren't meisav hevel on it. Also, a goy, this is not something you can ask or hint or whatever for a goy to do unless it's a chayil shem beisakana, something like that. A thermos, interestingly, the achrein today say a thermos is mutter, because it's not derech hatmana. Hatmana is you're putting the pot under something. Here, the kli itself preserves the warmth. That's not. It's like a keli. It's just like another pot. Happens to be this pot is better at preserving warmth. And with a crack pot, generally, it's not a problem because you have it's one thing inside another thing, and there's space. The pot that has the cholent in it or whatever, there's some space between that and the heating element.
The heating element touches the ceramic.
Mm-hmm.
The electricity, the hot bottom is touching the ceramic. That's how it stays hot. So if